The Zion Global Ministries way. Hey, the Zion Global Ministries way.
Hello, Zion Global Village. Thank you so much for tuning in to our Bible study. I'm excited about our conversation today. I have two of our elders with me. You know, Elder Latier Hudson, and this is Elder Troy Luke. And we're going to just recap Sunday's message as we were speaking of the Lord is coming. And we got to a section in 2 Timothy 3 and 2 where Paul speaks about the fact that the day would come when children would be disobedient to the parents. And from there we ended up in Isaiah 19 and a prophecy that absolutely blew our mind. So I'm going to allow you all to experience the fun that we have on Sundays after service. You remember when your moms would cook a good meal on Sunday, and then you go back after everybody is settled down, maybe company is gone, and you go back to the fridge and you nibbling on things.
Yep.
Get out of there.
Absolutely.
So that's what we do on Sunday. Yeah. We're nibbling on things. We'll get a plate all over again. Leftovers, have dessert, and it is just yummy. It's actually better the second, third time.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we were in discussion, and I thought, man, Latier and I said, we got to share this with our audience on Wednesday. And I'm sure there were several things of that message that kind of hit you. But one of the things that you talked about was the image of our old house on California Avenue. What was it that struck you about that house and its image?
Yeah. Just first and foremost, to think about that's where you lived. And, you know, the home and what the home even represents, you know, and seeing that older house, knowing where it sits, knowing the community that it sits in, but knowing that when you drive by a house, you don't really know until you know. And when you know who lives in the house, that changes the dynamics of what's going on in that home. And when you know there's a standard that's in that home, and you just don't know that your neighbors know that there's a standard in that home. And so my house, our house in Detroit, you know, it just took me right back. It took me right back. That house still sits there today. Yours is still there today, you know, and when we go by the house and I just drive up and down the street, just to know who was living in the house and that my parents were there and the standard that they set for us in that house. And, you know, they always used to tell us, like, you know, we're not the Joneses. And I used to trip on, like, well, who the heck is the Joneses? Who are you talking about? And they would say, it's somebody other than the people that live in this house. Our last name is Hudson. And this is what we do. So don't look out of your eyes at what someone else is doing, because that's not what we do. And that was the standard. And it was just a spoken or enforced. You know, you start talking about being persuaded. There was never a need to persuade. It was always obedience.
Right. Yeah.
Because obedience was pushed.
It was pushed. How about you, Troy?
Well, when I saw the picture of the house on Sunday, it reminded me of the house that I grew up in as well. And one of the things that I noticed about it, how the yard was manicured. You know, grass was cut, hedges trimmed. And I grew up in that type of environment where my father, by the time I was age 10, I was cutting grass, cutting the front yard. I had to trim the edges of the grass, had to trim the hedges. And we also had some elderly neighbors that stayed to the right of us. And, you know, Mr. Stockton, he used to cut his grass all the time, but he got to the point where he couldn't cut his grass because he had emphysema. And so my father told me, he said, hey, when you cut our grass, you cut their grass. You trim our hedges, you trim their hedges. And so I would take care of 2 yards. And so you can always tell, you know, like Latier said, of a standard is there just by the appearance, you know. And everybody on the street, when I grew up in Avondale during the 60s and the 70s, everybody manicured, took care of their yard. You know, everybody knew, oh, I got to go home and cut grass. And then there were a few single older ladies on the street where we go up and cut their grass too. They give us a couple of dollars, whatever. And so, yeah, that's what it took me back to.
That's really, really rich. So you were taught by your parents the whole concept of community, respect and honor.
Yes.
Even as you were growing up.
Yes.
Now, Latier, I remember the first time I saw your dad. He's a big man, had this strong, strong presence. And so your friends, your buddies felt some kind of way coming in your house.
Well, as I mentioned to you, the standard was set, right? And you know, we really couldn't have people come to our house. We were not allowed to have people come to our house. So if we met with you, if you came over, you sit on the porch. You sit on the steps, right? And my father smoked cigarettes, and they typically didn't see him. Neighbors, people didn't see my father, because if he went out the back door, because we had a garage in the back of our house. But every now and then he would come sit on the front porch, and he would literally sit on the front porch and just look around, smoke cigarette, look around. And my friends told me after he died that they were scared to come by our house because of the presence of my father. So they would cross the street and come down the street, but I never knew that. I mean, they didn't say it then, but you know, later on they said, you know, your dad, man, it was something about your dad. He would be sitting on that porch and we would look out and see him on that porch and like, cross the street, you know. And they said it was just out of honor and respect, you know. I mean, somewhat fearful, but it was more out of honor and respect. And they knew what he demanded of us, that you can do and you can't do. There's certain things you can do, other things you can't do, you know. So in front of our house, we could only go maybe one house to the right, one house to the left. That's as far as we could go. You can't cross the street. You better not show up off the street, because there's repercussions.
Wow.
And you didn't want them from him. Zero.
I love it, man. I love it. The fact that we had parents who demanded of us certain things, and there were lines you knew that you could not cross.
Absolutely.
And it's because of that, and of course the protection of God, that we're able to sit at this table
Absolutely.
Amen.
today
Amen.
whole. And I want that so badly for all of our families, is that we get back to raising up the standard. Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yes, he does.
John 10:10. And we talked about the forces on both sides of the house that were seeking to come in. And we mentioned something about a familiar spirit. The spirit that studies households, gets intelligence, and finds ways to get in. And when that came to me, and then I read it in Isaiah 19, it really just totally messed me up, because I wasn't looking for it. You know, I just happened to view this book on a shelf that's not even a part of my bookshelf. You know, I just set it aside and said, one day I'm gonna get to this book. And I looked over and it was as though it was saying, come here.
Now's the time.
Now's the time. And boom, to get that revelation, where it begins off talking about Egypt. Okay, so when you heard the phrase Egypt, what came to your mind?
Well, when you start talking about Egypt, you know, I went back and to some research that I've done a couple of years ago in regards to how Egypt, the name Egypt itself is a very recent term, and that how the ancient Egyptians, they called it themselves Kemet. The country was called Kemet, which means the land of the blacks. You know, because the Delta, the Nile River was so rich. There was black soil. There were black people there. You know, and so the ancient name of Egypt is Kemet, which means lands of the blacks. So when you said that, and then you said, "Gotta pray for me," I said, "Oh yeah, I know where he's going. I know where he's going. Yeah, I gotta pray for you." Because some folks, I mean, when you said weeds in the Bible, I said, "What is he talking about? Weeds in the Bible?" And when you lifted up that book, oh, that's where he's going. Yeah, we are in the Bible, and we're all through there. And just, you know, just like I was sharing with you guys earlier, that Israel, the nation of Israel, was birthed in Egypt, or shall I say Kemet, right? In ancient times. And so that, it's Egypt. And then you have to understand also, I'm going to put this out there, that the ancient Israelites looked like the Egyptians, right? Because, you know, I came across a scripture, I want to say it's in the book of Genesis, where at the time when Joseph was being buried, he told him, when y'all leave Egypt, don't y'all carry my bones up out of here, right? And so they honored Joseph's request, right? And so there's this big procession of the Israelites taking Joseph out of Egypt to bury his bone. They're having a big procession, and then there was this crowd that's looking from afar. I think the Bible said they were the Chaldeans, but there were some people in the land who saw this. And they said, wow, this is a sorrowful time for the Egyptians. That's in Scripture. Yeah. But it weren't the Egyptians. It was the Israelites. Why did they say that? Because they looked like them. They looked like them.
Wow.
They looked like
you have to think about it. How did Moses, how did he fit in? He was from the children of Israel, but he's in the house of Egypt, right, with the Pharaoh. So it's just interesting to think about, you know. Of course, we can look at our modern day, you know, painting and whitewashing of a lot of things. And, you know, my favorite movie in the world is The Ten Commandments, right? You know, so I watch it. I watch it all the time. But just to think about it, you know, it's like, you know, I remember saying, this ain't all true.
Right, yeah.
So it's nice. It's nice. It's nice drama and all that, but it's not all true.
Yeah.
And that's the difference now, is finding out what the truth really is.
Yeah, what the truth really is.
You heard Egypt. What hit you?
Well, you know, I did some studying on Noah and Noah's children, and understanding that Ham was one of his children, and just like Nimrod is grandson of Ham, but one of his children name was Mizraim, Egypt. And in reality, just like I think Zoe said before, it's like, you know, we really didn't learn the map that well when I was growing up. And so, you know, Egypt just seemed like it's over there, but we really just didn't know that Egypt was in Africa. And like, oh, that's where they're coming out of. When they left Egypt, they're coming out of Africa, you know, going into another country, you know, leaving the continent, because we know Africa is not a country, you know, but it was just interesting when you brought it up. I thought about, we enslaved the Israelites. That's messed up. That's messed up.
Yeah, so that concept that you raised about a certain Pharaoh.
Yes. See,
just really, really hit me. Share that.
So, you know, leading out of Genesis, coming out of Genesis 50, and you think about Jacob said, bury me where my father is buried and where I've buried one of my wives. And he was taking him to a place. So Joseph, being his second to last son, had risen to a place of prominence in Egypt. He's in Egypt, right? So he takes him into a place that's near Egypt. And now it becomes a place of their home. Well, after time has passed, Joseph dies. And they said it came about that there was a Pharaoh in the land that knew not the God of Joseph. And there was a favor on Joseph's life. So when Joseph was dictating and operating in his role, it got to a point where his role was very prominent. He wasn't the Pharaoh, but he had a very prominent role. We get to a point where he's not here anymore.
Right.
And who are these people? And we don't know a lot about those people. All we know is that they have a lot of kids.
Yeah.
And as they're having these kids, they're gonna outnumber us soon. Egypt turned against the children of Israel and turned them into not just a place for you to live. Now we're gonna put you in slavery while you're here. So that's what hit me. That it came to a point, just like in our day, we would say, well, everybody knows our history. No, not really. To get to a point where I don't know what we're talking about anymore. We've transitioned to something else.
Yeah.
Now it's funny that you mentioned the name Mizraim, right? You say he was the son of Ham.
Son of Ham.
Son of Ham, and they are the
Egyptians.
The Egyptians.
Yeah.
Now get this.
Yeah.
The ancient Israelites called the Egyptians Mizraim.
That's it. That's the word. That's what I'm saying. Mizraim. Yep.
Mitzrayim. So they're calling them by their,
Yes,
they're calling them by who they are. You are the sons of Mizraim, Mitzrayim. That's what they called Egypt.
Wow.
Mitzrayim, yes.
Wow. Now let's talk more about these Egyptians, these black folks who look like you and I.
Yes, yes.
We's in the Bible.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Before I get to that, it really messed me up and blessed me at the same time when Zoe, my nephew, who's behind the camera, revealed that it wasn't until he was in the 11th grade that he really was exposed to the Egyptians, who they were.
Right.
And they were actually pioneers
Oh, yeah.
of great things. Talk about that.
Well, me being a math teacher.
Both of you are math guys. Oh, Lord, me in the middle of some math guys.
That's funny.
Being a former math teacher, one of my professors, I'll never forget her, Dr. Kimia Moyo, and she was always had us looking up the history of mathematics, and that goes all the way back to Egypt. It goes all the way back to Egypt. Yeah, and so the way they built the pyramids, I mean, those things are so precise. They said that the decimal points go to the 10th and 12th place. That's how accurate they were.
Calculus before calculus.
Yeah, they don't understand how they did it.
Yeah.
And then what gets me is that everything that you see what's going on with the Greeks, the Greeks learned everything from the Egyptians. Everything. Everything you see about the Colosseum in Greece, the Acropolis, and all their gods, all that stuff is right out of Egypt. Right out of Egypt. The math, they were doing the complex math way before the Greeks. As a matter of fact, I think I came across a reading, it was in the histories, that when the first Greek walked into Egypt, he walked in wearing like loincloth and stuff, looking like, I guess, like a peasant. And the folks in Egypt, they like, where are your gold bracelets? Where are your gold anklets? I mean, the Egyptians, they were
higher standard.
Yeah, they were way above their time, way before their time. By the time the Greeks got there, and so it's just that, they were just so in advance in their day.
Yeah. See, for me, it's the same as we think about technology, and I'm into technology, right? So mathematics and technology was taking place in their time.
Yeah.
You're talking about 3000 BC.
Yeah.
3000 BC. All of this is being birthed right in this land and by these people that we are really partakers in to this day.
Yeah.
To this very day. There are some strategies and ways of doing things from a mathematical standpoint that carried over for thousands of years. But that history is lost, seemingly lost, because we don't really know where we come from.
Yeah, yeah. And then when you talk about the pyramids, the Great Pyramids of Giza, how did they know how to align it in a certain year? It lines up with certain constellations.
Yeah.
I think it's the Orion constellation. It lines up exactly, and you know, scientists and mathematicians and they still don't know how they were managed to do that. I mean, they were studying astronomy before it was called astronomy, you know, and so, but they just paid attention to the signs, you know, the different seasons and how the earth rotated, and they looked in the stars.
Man,
Bible legacy.
Yeah.
these folks were so blessed, gifted with wisdom and knowledge, but somewhere they went awry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they became confident in their own greatness. And as you said, there was a Pharaoh that grew, I mean, it's an example, that didn't know the Lord.
Right.
And so they began to delve into idolatry, Satanism, and those kinds of things, and were then judged by God,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so that the wisdom that was birthed out of the land would not be carried on. It would not be passed along in terms of knowledge. And that's a part of, guys, what we're dealing with today.
Yeah.
When you talk about the greatness that they possessed in terms of mathematics, and I look at how we struggle in that
Yeah.
that particular area,
Yeah.
you know, you have to consider the credibility of the word.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
What do you now say to your students in regards to mathematics and understanding it and embracing it?
Well, as a math teacher, what I would do, I would identify with their, I guess, with their fear of mathematics, because when I was in high school, you know, I wasn't pushed into the mathematics. It didn't come till after I had graduated from college and started substitute teaching, where I was teaching an adult class where I had to teach all the subjects. And so math is something that I had to really dive into. I had all the reading and the writing. I could teach how to write, how to form sentences and write papers and so forth like that. But the math part is where I really had to brush up on. And when I started reading it, it just started coming to me real quickly. And so that's when I decided an opportunity came where Cincinnati Public Schools, they were looking for more math teachers. They had a cohort program going on. So I got a part of that, got into that, and started learning math. And so it just started coming to me. And so I would always tell my students, hey, don't worry about if you don't know this. My job is to get you through this, just to assure them that, hey, you know, I'm setting up the class for you to pass with at least a B. If you just do what I ask you to do, you know, and work hard at it, that's what you should get, a B, at least a B or better. And so, but I'll also tell them in regards to the math history is that, you know, as far as Black people are concerned, I mean, we invented the math. I mean, when you look at what they did in Egypt, I mean, they were, like you said, they were pioneers. Yeah. I mean, they knew how to measure, they knew how to calculate when the delta would flood, right? You know, they would have to go out and then, okay, well, we got to measure your plot of land so we can plot your grain,
your crops,
and stuff like that. They knew how to do that. They knew how to, when the flood, when the Nile would overflow, what to do and everything. So they figured that stuff out.
Wow.
You know, Pastor, what we struggle with identity, and if you have no reference point to point back to, you know, especially these days, parents, their standards are kind of low. And I remember you said something about you can't come up to low standards.
You can't rise
You
to
know,
low
you can't
standards.
rise to low standards. So if the standard is not kept at a certain level, you can't come up to that. Our parents, my parents in particular, I know, you couldn't get a C. there will be no C's. So you get an A or a B, or you need to be doing something else, but you don't get C's. We don't get C's, okay?
Right.
That's kind of like mediocre, right? So that was kind of pushed in me early on, you know, and the exposure to math, I was exposed to math first, second grade. You know, my brother's 9 years older than me. He was teaching me calculus in the 3rd grade.
Wow.
You know, so he was pushing, because he was doing it.
Right.
So he was like, I'm just doing homework. You sit down and do homework with me. You know, so he's saying, you can multiply 3 numbers, 4 numbers, 5 numbers. Just do it, man. You got to learn this stuff. Like, so it was just driven. So it was exposure early on. And, you know, we shy away from things that are hard.
Yeah.
Seemingly hard, you know, when that's really our roots. That's our foundation.
Yeah.
So that's where we come from, which helps you with your identity. You don't get stuck in this place of I can't, and, you know, low self-esteem about who I am. But when you don't have a reference point, then we got to get the reference point back in place.
Well said, well said. In terms of our children and their disobedience, I think the identity piece is critical, because when you don't know who you are, then you try to compensate in being somebody that you're really not.
Right. Yeah.
And that can go really, really bad. As we close, what do you say that we need to do to parents to get our kids back to the point of greatness that God put inside of us?
Well, I mentioned standards probably 100 times already, but the standard in the home, because that's where it starts, it's in the home. The standard in the home has to be reestablished or established, one or the other. So if it's not established, establish it. If it's been lost, reestablish it, and just put a marker down. From this point on, this is what we do. I'm sorry, it is what it is, but this is what we do. And stay with it, not 1 month, 2 months. This is just the way it's going to be. It's like lifestyle. So worship, lifestyle. Eating, dieting, not dieting, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
You know, so change the standard in the home. Establish it, reestablish it.
Troy?
Yeah, I would say also the standard in the home, but also making sure you get them exposed to opportunities, you know, different opportunities. Like when my 2 sons, Micah and Jamin, when they were younger, I used to take them to math tutoring. You know, I would tutor them at home, but then there was this one guy who was teaching a different type of math of how to multiply numbers real quickly, you know, and I would take Micah and Jamin to this guy every week, and it helped them in their math. So you got to give them exposure to different things. And also, I remember, you know, stressing discipline, and you got to know who your child is. And so I'm gonna tell this story about my son Jamin. When he was starting in elementary, you know, Jamin was just high energy, smart as a whip and high energy. So that's a good combination, right? And so he goes to kindergarten the first day, and his teacher just like, this Jamin, he is just really busy. And so Vicky and I put him and Micah in Taekwondo. Okay, and so that exposure to a more disciplined, more rigid atmosphere helped him to focus more and to settle down, know when to be assertive and not to be assertive. And so I would say also to parents, you know, expose your children to different things like Taekwondo or soccer. Like I played basketball in high school, right? Try to get my sons to play basketball, but neither one of them played basketball, right? But my son Micah, he got into track, and so whatever they get into, you support them. You know, you go to the games, you go to the track meets, and that's what my wife and I did. Vicky and I did. We supported them, you know, in the things that we got them into and they were exposed to. You know, that just helped to develop their character. And then stressing the expectations at home all the time, you know. It's like, okay, hey, A, like you say, A's or B's. That's what we told them. Y'all get nothing but A's and B's. And so I said, I'm a school teacher. And matter of fact, that's one of the reasons I went into mathematics, because I wanted to be that parent that if my children come home with a math problem, I want to be able to sit down and do it with them.
Amen.
Yeah.
Wow. I want to thank you guys. That was so rich, both of you, in sharing. And we've got to do this again.
Yeah.
We have to come back. I mean, nibbling on these things has been really fulfilling today.
Yeah.
And I want to encourage all of us to embrace those words, raise up the standards, take advantage of opportunities. In fact, that's what Jesus says to us. He says there are certain things that have to happen during these times before his coming.
Right.
But in that window of time, we have an opportunity. So let's take this opportunity to expose our children to the truth.
The truth, absolutely.
Thank you so much again for sharing your time. Shalom.
Shalom.
The Zion Global Ministries way.